Yeah, oh, I think this is one of the few things we did again. But it is something over. Yeah.
Very numerous.
Where is Reenie?
She's was in the kitchen, but she's either gonna be here or there.
Okay, I believe she'd be over there.
Okay. David, do you know Mark Krasinski? One nice guy.
Oh, yeah.
Just so you. I think he.
Hi, everyone. Good morning again. We are just getting ready to start.
I remember that. They would both do less. And. I would. Undo, but all they have, all the damage, all the.
Need more.
It's got some.
So, yes, there are. Are they just related to there are no.
I can get your tablecloth to put on there. Make it look nice, too.
Oh, I don't think it's too. And I'm sure we have better and. If it is. Better card tables, because they tell you Mahjong here. Okay, got it. Okay. But you try. Okay.
They brought the whole table. That's
Hey.
Well, if you stand right there, you'll be in the middle of the screen.
I'm not in charge of that screen. I'm not in charge of that screen. I'm just supposed to stand here. and print.
That's it. Okay.
I'll adjust,
You don't,
I'll adjust the screen too.
do you have a good sense of humor?
Some people think so. The most important people in my life don't always agree. There was one time I cracked a really bad daddy joke for my 9-year-old. It's not always, he's otherwise joyful, but there are some mornings where he's just grumpy. And he burst into tears and went walking to my wife in her office. And she was like, "What's wrong, Rafi? What's wrong?" And he burst into tears. He said, "He did it again." What did daddy do? He told a joke. He tells jokes all the time. I know, that's the problem. They're so bad.
One of the games we played yesterday was daddy jokes. Coming up with the answers.
It's horrible.
Just looking for an answer.
It is now verboten. I don't even know what it was that I had said, but obviously I said one thing way too many.
It was funny because the two daddies, my nephew and my brother, both got the answers the most.
They'll come around here.
Well, good. You're getting.
I don't have trouble.
Well, again, I want to welcome all of you this morning. Delighted you're with us. Delighted that Rabbi Dr. Crane is with us. And
Yes.
very delighted also, you don't need to introduce her. We just honored her last weekend at the gathering of CJL is the educator, is that what I'm getting right, of the year, which were the lifetime. The lifetime
Lifetime achievement, yeah.
The one they give you before that, they think you're about to die.
I'm still here.
So we want you to be roughly 120, Sherry. And those of us in Israel, our thoughts were with you that Sunday as we were traipsing the streets of Jerusalem. And so we're delighted to ask Sherry Blumberg, who is also on our committee planning this weekend, to introduce our speaker this morning.
Well, you know, it's always a pleasure. Okay. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It's never a pleasure to look at yourself in the mirror, but it's always a pleasure to introduce someone from HUC, Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, who went to the New York campus. Because for those of us who grew up.
Can everybody hear?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna just,
For those of us who grew up out west, Hebrew Union College was definitely in Los Angeles. Then there was a Hebrew Union College when I got to the Midwest. That was Chicago, right? Cincinnati, I know, but there's a story about that. I'll tell you later. And when I was at HUC in New York, they were talking of closing the school. And, you know, I left in 1999. They were still talking about closing the school. So it's
Magic.
So it's wonderful to. Dr. Crane, this is how things go every once in a while. It's flexibility. So. The formal introduction, for those of you who haven't heard it 3 times already, is that Dr. Crane is the Ethics Center at Emory University, where he earned a BA summa cum laude, by the way, from Wheaton College in Massachusetts, and an MA in International Peace Studies from the University of Notre Dame, and an MPhil, Master of Philosophy, right? In Gandhian thought from Gujarat Vidi Apik. He's a true child of this age. Okay. In India, and an MA in Hebrew Literature and Rabbinic Ordination from Hebrew Union College in New York. One of the things we have probably learned, I was only able to be here in the evening because yesterday I was challenging a snowdrift to me at a bar mitzvah, but he has a wonderful smile.
Here, now we're all set. Perfect.
I trained in Jewish education, and that's why I can survive this kind of thing. Because we know in Jewish education that anything is about to happen, so. But one of the things we have seen is a sense of humor, a ready smile, and a nice and sometimes rare combination of, thank you, of combining text and Judaica, good sense, and scholarly approaches. And for that, it's a very special talent, and we are greatly appreciative of you being here. I could go on with more of the things that you've written and done, but I think I would rather hear you talk than me. Oh, that's yours. Oh, yes, mine's on the chair. Thank you.
You really want this though, you might let it out.
So good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to join you. I will make sure that you can hear me. Don't worry. So good morning. Good morning. It's really a pleasure to continue our learning together. This morning, we are going to turn our thank you very much for the kind introduction this morning, as well as every single time. It does get kind of, it's strange to hear people actually say nice things. So it's really a pleasure. So
Well, get
thanks.
used to it.
So this morning, we're going to be turning our attention not from the end of life, but now towards the beginning of life. And we could spend a whole semester, which we do at Emory's Center for Ethics in our Masters of Bioethics program that we teach, spending some time thinking about when does life begin. Tonight, this morning, we're not going to talk about when life actually begins philosophically, theologically, but how do you go about bringing life into existence? And so we're going to look at how does a parent become a parent? And specifically, how does a mommy become a mommy? And there are multiple ways that a mommy can become a mommy. We're going to look at some texts and see that this question of fertility and its obverse, the challenge of infertility, is nothing new. And that Jews have been wrestling with these questions and issues and concerns and drives for thousands of years, and have spent a lot of time talking about it, meditating, having conversations, and spilling precious ink on expensive parchment about these particular topics. And so we're going to look at some of these classic resources and try and figure out what it is that they might have to say for the contemporary moment. So the story that we're actually going to focus on is a famous one that I'm sure that you've all studied at one point or another. It is the relationship that goes on between Jacob and his wife. Who is Jacob's wife?
Rachel.
Leah and Leah.
It was a trick question. That's right. He has two wives. Are you sure it's just two wives?
No.
And a couple of concubines, exactly. So why does Jacob have not just one wife, but two wives and a couple of concubines? It's all about procreation. And so we're going to look at that story and see just what kind of a bit role Jacob has in his production of progeny. So we're going to be bouncing back and forth from the text. So those of you who are on Zoom, the link was put into the chat. So hopefully you have access to the document there, but we will be reading them aloud. So you all have a handout here. Text 1 is from Genesis chapter 30, verses 1 through 8. We will be going through, I think, all of chapter 30, but it's going to be interrupted with some rabbinic literature as well. So buckle your seatbelts and get ready for a rocky ride. So who would like to read the first text? We'll keep it in English just to keep it flowing. Go ahead, Lois.
When Rachel saw that she had borne Jacob no children, she became envious of her sister.
You gotta read it louder.
You have to go into the, otherwise.
Oh, okay.
Zoom people.
The people
can't
can't
hear it.
hear.
Here you go.
When Rachel saw that she had borne Jacob no children, she became envious of her sister. And Rachel said to Jacob, "Give me children or I shall die." Jacob was incensed at Rachel and said, "Can I take the place of God who has denied you fruit of the womb?" She said, "Here is my handmaiden Bilhah. Consort with her that she may bear on my knees, and that through her I may too have children." So she gave him her handmaiden Bilhah as concubine, and Jacob cohabited with her. Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. And Rachel said, "God has vindicated me. Indeed, he has heeded my plea and given me a son." Therefore she named him Dan. Rachel's handmaiden Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, "A fateful contest I waged with my sister. Yes, and I have prevailed." So she named him Naphtali.
Thank you. So if you haven't noticed my pedagogic style, what do you notice? That's the first question. What do you notice?
She's gonna be a surrogate.
So who is going to be a surrogate? Bilhah, okay. And who is Bilhah? Whose handmaiden? Rachel's handmaiden. So we need to keep relationships clear here. And what is, so let's go back to the very beginning, before we even get to Bilhah and being the concubine or the surrogate. What's the problem? Rachel is infertile, and how is this ascertained?
I'm sure through several attempts to have a baby.
Who observes this?
Rachel herself.
Correct. Jacob is not concerned about this. Why?
Yeah, other.
He already has kids. Kids through whom? Through Leah, right? So again, Leah is his first wife, even though he had wanted to marry Rachel. There was a switcheroo fiasco at the chuppah. And through Leah, he has already had 4 children. So he is unconcerned about progeny. Rachel, his second wife, is concerned. So that's interesting. Who takes the primary onus, the emotional side and concern about having progeny in contemporary relationships?
Usually the man.
Oftentimes it's the woman. Pardon?
Not mine.
Well, I'm not saying exclusively or exhaustively, but oftentimes the woman takes the sort of emotional burden of thinking about progeny and when to procreate. So she sees herself as not bearing Jacob any children. And what is her emotional response to that?
Give me children or
Before that, she became envious of her sister. So this again is not prescription, but perhaps descriptive of many women's emotional state when they are in a relationship, they want to have children or having difficulty having children, and they see their peers in their own relationships having children. And I'm sure that we all have anecdotes that could perhaps support that kind of statement there. But then what does she do? She approaches her husband and she says, "Give me children or I shall die." This, I should let you know, is the first and only time in the biblical corpus, in the whole Bible, where it is acknowledged that men have a biological role in reproduction. It's the only time in the Bible. Later on, the rabbis acknowledged that men have a biological contribution, but this is the only time. So she is pointing her finger at her husband and says, "You need to give me children. It's your responsibility. You have something to give to me." And of course, they didn't know about sperm, but by the way, trigger warning, we're going to be talking about biology here and procreation. But they didn't know because it was subocular. Anything that was that you can't see with the naked eye, it didn't really exist in the biblical context. The rabbis had imagination. They could imagine things that were subocular, but in the biblical world, they didn't. So she says to her husband, "I've got a problem. You're the solution. You need to help me out." And what is Jacob's response?
This is not responsibility, it's God.
And that's right. Don't talk to me.
Yeah.
I'm just your husband. I just work here. Right?
Pointing fingers.
Exactly. This seems to be a trope in the Judaic textual tradition here of deflecting responsibility. It's not me. I didn't do it.
Not my fault.
And so
Isn't it more than that, though? He's actually saying, who am I to overrule God who has apparently decreed that you're not gonna have children?
correct. So it bespeaks a Jewish theology of anthropology. Now, let me unpack those terms here. It is talking about, according to a Judaic worldview about how Homo sapiens procreate, that there are 3 partners: the woman, the man, and God. And each one, and there are some beautiful midrashim that talk about that. What are the ingredients that each one contributes to the construction of a new human being? And I'm going to screw it up, but I think the woman provides red stuff, the man provides black stuff, and God provides white stuff, or vice versa. And so the red stuff becomes your blood, the black stuff becomes the blacks of your eyes, and the white stuff is the white of your eyes, and other sinews and muscle and stuff like that. So I'm not remembering that midrashim, but all three are necessary contributors to the construction of a human being. So this is an early articulation that there are three entities, if you will, necessary for the construction of a human being. So she identifies a problem. She's not fertile. She needs a child. He's the solution. He demurs. He does not want to take up that role, and so she comes up with the second solution. What's the second solution to her problem? Correct. Surrogacy. Absolutely. So she offers her handmaiden Bilhah, and she says that through her, consort with her, in other words, have sex with her, that she may bear on my knees, that through her I too may have children. So now take a look at the next verse there. So Jacob cohabited with her, so he had sex with her. Now what happened? Bilhah conceives, she bears Jacob a son. But who names this child? Rachel names this child. So there are three verbs to become a mommy. Three verbs: to conceive, to bear, and to name. To conceive. What does that include? It includes sex, but it includes the gametes. So it includes the egg and the sperm, right? That is necessary for conception. And what, bless you, what do you find inside of these gametes? DNA. So it's your genetic relationship. That's one component, bless you, of becoming a parent. Then there is to bear. What does it mean to bear? To give birth. And who can give birth? Somebody who's been pregnant, somebody who's gestated that fetus, correct? So then now there's gestation all the way through to birth. And then there's the naming of this newborn. And where does naming occur? It occurs in community. It occurs in society. It is the social dimension. So there are three dimensions to becoming a mommy: a genetic component, a gestational component, and a social component. And those are three distinct components. Whenever you are reading a biblical story about mommyhood and childrenhood, those are words, right? Take note of those three verbs. Go back to the Garden of Eden stories, and you will read about how Eve conceived, bears, and names. If you read the book of Ruth, you will also read that. If you read other stories, the stories about Hannah as well, she conceives, bears, and names. These are the three verbs to become a mommy. And we should pay attention to these three verbs as we move forward in this study together.
I have a question. It says, therefore, she named him Dan. What's the cause? Why Dan?
So you have to then go into the Hebrew. So in the Hebrew, where is it? The Tamar Rachel, the Danani Elohim. So 5 lines up in the Hebrew from the bottom, the Tamar Rachel Danani Elohim. So Rachel said, God has judged me, Danani. It's the same root as Dan.
Okay.
So anytime that you see the explanation of a name, look at the Hebrew, because the transliteration is hiding, or the translation is hiding the Hebrew roots. Please.
What does it mean when the consort with her that she may bear on my knees? and that who I assume may have disability. What does it mean bear on my knees?
So, think back to how women used to give birth. So the question is, how is it that a woman bears on her knees? They used to stoop. And go back to the beginning of the book of Exodus. Shiphrah and Puah, the midwives. And what was their claim about why they were unsuccessful to fulfill Pharaoh's genocidal program to destroy all of the male children of the Israelites? It's because the Israelite women squatted vigorously on their birthing stones. So please excuse the gross demonstration, but women used to give birth like this. Standing up on their knees, resting, letting gravity help. And Rachel is describing herself sitting behind the birthing woman and holding her, so that she too is participating in the birth process of Bilhah. And so it's as if she is vicariously giving birth through this handmaid.
And becoming a mother, giving the name really doesn't seem like it's that important. And what's not mentioned is caring for the child once the child is born, which is one of the things that we would say makes someone a mother.
Correct. So the social side, the raising of a child has become increasingly more important in recent generations. But that is not to say that these other pieces of becoming a mommy are not important. Think about Moses. Moses was conceived and born by his biological mother, but was named by Pharaoh's daughter. Exactly. So he has two mommies, if you will, because he was nursed by his biological mother, but named by his adoptive mother. So it's really interesting if you look at the variety of different biblical stories, how they disaggregate all of these different verbs. And as we go through these texts, they will really disaggregate all of these verbs and empower us to think creatively and generatively about what it means to become a parent and a mommy in particular. Yeah.
Just to follow up, is it possible that are you not a person until you are given a name by which you can be referred to by God or by society? Is that?
Exactly. That and this is born, pun intended, born out in the rabbinic tradition, that if a male child dies before it is given a name, it is not given full funereal rights. As similarly for a daughter, before 30 days before she's given a name, she is all, and God forbid she dies, she's also not given full funereal rights because she has not been socially named. The parents might have a name, they might call her a particular name, but that's in private. It's not a socially recognized existence just yet.
So does it mean the baby has to be named in the temple or in a chapel where there's?
Wherever or whenever the baby naming occurs, then that child now is socially acknowledged. Biologically acknowledged from the get-go, but socially acknowledged. But let's get back to, that's a very somber side of these stories. Let's get back to the happier side and weirder side of these stories. So we've got a problem, which is Rachel is infertile. She's found a solution, which is her husband. He demurs and says, no, it's not about me. So she says, fine, I'll use a surrogate. So that's her second solution. And we've identified now that there are a couple of verbs associated with motherhood. And this happens a couple of times. So she gets two children, correct? She gets Dan and Naphtali through her handmaiden. And she articulates some sort of competition. She's envious of her sister at the very beginning, and at the very end of this first text, she's waged a fateful contest with her sister, and she's prevailed. So in other words, she is emotionally invested in this drive for progeny vis-a-vis her sister. Now, how do the rabbis interpret this whole scenario. So text 2, Genesis Rabbah. I'll read the text so that everybody on this screen can also hear. So in response to Jacob's denial of his role, Rachel then asks Jacob this question. Thank you. Is this how your father Isaac acted toward your mother Rebekah? Did he not gird his loins for her, since Isaac strove and prayed so that Rebekah would become pregnant? Jacob replied, he did not have children. I have children. That is, I already have 4 children from Leah. Rachel responded, and did not your grandfather, that is Abraham, have children, plural, that is Isaac and Ishmael? Yet he girded his loins for Sarah. That is, nonetheless, Abraham made the effort of praying so that Sarah would become pregnant. He told her, you can do as my grandmother Sarah did. And she asked him, and what did Sarah do? He replied, she brought a rival wife, Hagar, into her house. And she responded, if this is the obstacle, then here is my maid Bilhah. Consort with her, that through her I too may have children. So Rachel is now offering to Jacob, her husband, a third solution to resolve their situation. What is that third solution? If the first one is him, and the second one is Bilhah, what's the third solution? Praying, exactly. Pray on my behalf, right? Pray on my behalf. It seems to be that that's your family's solution to infertility. Your father did it. In fact, your grandfather did it. They prayed on their wives' behalf. And so she is wanting her husband to do something. How frequently has that trope been articulated? And so Jacob finally agrees that he could pray, but he also offers that there was another solution that is a family tradition, which is to use surrogates to address this issue.
Comment. It's interesting to me as I listen to this. One would think that Jacob, at the spiritual nature and spiritual level, would not have to be told by his wife and your family lineage of prayer to be able to request things that are not coming naturally. Can you comment on that, please?
Sure. So the question is about Jacob's spiritual, not acumen, but his makeup, and why, at least in this vignette, he seems to be being reprimanded and taught by his wife about these kinds of issues. It is curious that throughout all of chapter 30, Jacob is a bit character. Things happen to him, and he is used and manipulated, and we'll see how that happens throughout this whole story. And this could very well be another text that is what I would call a proto-feminist text about the power and wisdom and ingenuity of women to address both existential as well as psychical issues of great import. And Jacob comes off as a very weak character, at least in this particular chapter. So other texts that sort of speak to this issue, here another Genesis Rabbah, text 3, Rachel died. After Rachel had died, Bilhah, Rachel's handmaiden, she raised Joseph as if she were his mother. So Bilhah takes on not only the biological role of genetically mothering and gestating Jacob's children, but she also takes on the nursing role, the social role, if you will, to become the mommy of other children. So Bilhah becomes a mommy with all 3 verbs. She doesn't name them, but she takes on the other social aspects. Text 4.
What happens to Benjamin in this little piece here?
Well, let's find out. Text 4 here. When Rachel died, Bilhah entered Rachel's tent and took her place and nursed Benjamin. And even though it had been many years since she had given birth, milk came to her, and so she nursed him. So Bilhah seems to be this remarkable woman who is able and willing to take on other children who are not her own and become their nursemaid. This role of nursing is not insignificant. It is considered to be an extraordinary compliment to women who do so. Why? Because if you recall in Genesis chapter 3, Adam called the name of his wife Eve, for she was the mother of all living, which according to the rabbis in text 6 in Avodah Zarah, Eve suckled the whole world. She nursed the whole world. So if you are able to nurse, it is as if you are nursing the whole world. And you all know that the other individual, that any individual is a world into and of herself or himself. So this Judaism has long embraced the image of a nursing woman as a trope of extraordinary life-giving, of world-giving, of world-making. So it's an extraordinary compliment for Bilhah. So let's return back now to the biblical text. The story continues. Text 7, chapter 30 in Genesis. So when Leah now saw that she herself has stopped bearing children, she took her maid Zilpah and gave Zilpah to Jacob as a concubine. When Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son, and Leah said, "Oh, what luck!" So she named him Gad, not God, Gad. When Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son, Leah declared, "What fortune!" Meaning women will deem me fortunate. So she named him Asher. So again, the disaggregation of the three verbs of conceiving, bearing, and naming. But we should go back to that first sentence there. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, why did she stop bearing?
She was old. Or,
Could be menopause.
yeah.
It could also be momentary infertility. Women's fertility fluctuates. It could also very well be lack of sex. It takes two, right? At least. And it could very well be that Jacob is otherwise preoccupied. He's got Rachel, and now he's got Bilhah, with whom he can consort.
Yeah.
And perhaps Leah is not getting much Jacob attention. And that could be a reason for why she is not reproducing. But it is a concern to her. And she does not, like Rachel, accuse him of keeping his ingredients from her. So is that an issue of ignorance? Is that what she had already given birth to 4 children? So maybe she was satisfied with the amount of her offspring already. It's unclear. But she nonetheless is doing the exact same thing that her sister did, which is to give her handmaid Zilpah to Jacob, and through Zilpah is able to now have 2 more children. And she is very much concerned about how she is viewed in other people's eyes. Women will deem me fortunate. It's not that I view myself as fortunate. It's their perception of me that matters most. So the Bible is beginning to slowly construct a picture of who Leah is in her character, and we'll come to that more in just a moment. Text 8, Genesis Rabbah. When Zilpah, her maid, had given birth, in regard to all of the other matriarchs, Scripture says she conceived, but here it actually says she gave birth. Why? For her pregnancy had not been recognized. So here, you should take a look at the Hebrew in the second line. It says, "Vateled ela bechura haita." That means bechura, she was a young woman. What do you know about young women and their menses?
Don't develop.
It could be inconsistent,
Yeah.
right? And it's irregular. And so what this rabbinic text, written by rabbis, read by rabbis, intermale text here, is perhaps talking about how Zilpah was so young that her menses were irregular and went unnoticed. So this raises an eyebrow in the contemporary world about how young is Zilpah that Jacob is consorting with her. But that is perhaps one reason why the biblical text does not include that verb conceive, is that they didn't notice that she had, that her menses had stopped.
Isn't it possible that that's why Rivka spent the first part of her life also infertile? Because she was
She was so young.
young, yeah, from when she came at the well.
I mean, I don't recall her age being articulated in the biblical text. Do any of you remember?
No, but in,
Had to wait 14 years after. he
No,
got
no, no,
up
Bill-
and married her. She couldn't have been that young.
Right.
no, it's that's, you're talking about Bilhah and Zilpah. I'm talking about
Rachel.
Rivka, like Rachel.
Not
No,
Rivka,
no,
Rivka.
Rebecca.
Yes. So,
Rebecca goes to ask.
right,
because
I would have to look in the biblical story again about when Jacob and Rebecca first meet, about how old she is, if it talks
There's
about
a
how old,
midrash that says she was 4.
oh, that she was 4 and in charge of her flock.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, you gotta wonder what the rabbis were thinking. But let's return to the biblical story here now. Text 9, in Genesis chapter 30, the story continues. Because how many children, by the way, will Jacob ultimately have?
Oh,
A lot of them,
13.
13, a baker's dozen.
Yeah.
Exactly.
13 sons.
12 sons
Well, when one daughter.
and one
okay.
daughter. So let's see how that plays out. Text 9, chapter 30, verses 14 through 21. Once, at the time of the wheat harvest, Reuben came upon some mandrakes. Wait, let's stop there. Don't read on. What is a mandrake? A duck?
No, it's plants.
It's a,
This here is a mandrake, for those of you on the screen.
yeah, that looks like something out of Harry Potter.
It's straight out of Harry Potter, exactly. If Harry Potter was written in the 13th century. This is a mandrake. A mandrake is a root.
Yeah.
Here is another medieval depiction of it. And here is a female depiction of it. So it is a root that was understood to have aphrodisiac and procreative powers.
Okay.
And in the Hebrew, it's Judaim. It's the last word on the first line. So Reuben, who is Reuben? It's Leah's first son, so Jacob's firstborn, right? So Reuben, he's probably certainly not 4, he's much older than that. But Reuben, at the time of the wheat harvest, was wandering around and he came upon some mandrakes, some Judaim in the field. And so what did he do? He picks them and brought them to his mother Leah. Rachel goes to her sister Leah and says, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." Leah responded to Rachel, "Was it not enough for you to take away my husband, that you would also take my son's mandrakes?" Ah, now we get the answer to the question why Leah does not have more children. Because she says, "You've taken away my husband," which means my husband is not having sex with me. He's having sex with you and your concubine. So that could be the solution. That could be the answer to that question of why Leah is not having more children. And now she's saying to her sister, Rachel, "Would you also take my son's mandrakes, my aphrodisiac that I'm going to use?" Rachel replied, "I promise, he shall lie with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes. Fine, you can have our husband tonight, but I want those aphrodisiacs because they will help me procreate." When Jacob came home from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him. Whoa, wait. She went out? What does that mean?
Assuming that she went to him.
She went to him, which is unusual. Always pay attention to the movement of people in biblical stories, all right? So it doesn't waste ink, all right? These details are really important. It means that at other times, he would come all the way home without anybody coming out to meet him. So she is being proactive. She's He's coming back from the fields and she's going out of the household enclave and going out to meet him before he actually makes it to the driveway. And she says to her husband, "You are to sleep with me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." Now, here's an example of women buying men, right? Just so happens that they are legally related to each other, but be that as it may. So what happens? He lay with her that night. God heeded Leah, and so she conceived, verb 1, bore him a 5th son. And Leah said, "God has given me my reward for having given my maid to my husband." So she named him Issachar, the 3rd verb. Conceive, bear, and name. When Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a 6th son, Leah said, God has given me a choice gift. This time my husband will exalt me, for I have borne him 6 sons. So again, it's about others in view of her. She's very much concerned about her reputation. So she named this child Zebulun. Last, she bore him a daughter and named her Dinah. Anything? What do you notice?
Did he stop sleeping with the concubines and just slept with her during this time?
Doesn't say. So you can answer that however you would like. What else do you notice?
Notice that when Dean is born, there's nothing descriptive about it.
Correct? What else?
Dean had come from the word judgment, judge.
Very good. It is also related to the root Don. Exactly. So Rachel's first child is named Don, and Leah's last child is named Dinah. So there's some sort of parallelism. Good. What else do you notice? Yes.
Doesn't it feel like it has this reverb? Says to them, or am I
Exactly. What's missing?
conceiving her?
The conceiving part. Ha ha ha. Welcome to the wilds of rabbinic imagination. Turn to text 10. This is where it's going to get interesting. Text 10 from the Jerusalem Talmud. Ra said in the name of the school of Yanai regarding the gestation of Dinah, it used to be male, but after Rachel prayed, it was changed to female. Thus scripture says afterwards she bore him a daughter and named her Dinah, meaning it was after Rachel had prayed and it was changed to a female.
Doesn't work that way.
Wait, what? What do you mean?
Sisters have a terrible sibling rivalry.
There's something strange going on between Rachel and Leah, but it's profound, okay? So let's take a closer look at this. So we now have before us, at least according to text 10, we have Leah who is pregnant one more time. And Rachel acknowledges that her sister Leah is pregnant one more time. And so what does she do? She prays. And she prays that her sister Leah will give birth to a child, but that child really should be female. So the response is that God is able to, or somehow, that this fetus is changed from male to female. So there is, this is a rabbinic story about theurgy. Theurgy is the fancy word for saying that you can influence the theos. Ergi, like ergonomic chairs and things like that, it's energy. So it's about influencing the theos. Liturgy can influence God to do X, Y, or Z, whatever it is that you want. And this is a little vignette that says that Rachel has theurgic liturgical powers. Her prayer can influence God to have material ramifications in this world. You think that that's not true, but let's continue on. Text 11, Midrash Tanhuma. You find that this thing happened with Leah. What was this thing? After she had given birth to 6 sons, she, Leah, foresaw in a dream, that is, she prophesied, that there would be 12 tribes established from Jacob. Since she had already birthed 6 and was pregnant one more time with her 7th, and 2 came from each of the maidservants. Behold, she could add up. There were 10 children. Leah arose and remonstrated before God. In other words, she prayed, saying, O sovereign of the universe, there will be 12 tribes established from Jacob. And behold, there are already 6 by me, and I am pregnant with the 7th. And the maidservants have each given 2 for a total of 10. If this is a male child, it means for Rachel, my sister, that she will not even be like one of the maidservants. Because Jacob is only going to have 12. And if I have 7 and the maidservants have already given 4, that means that Rachel at best could only give birth to 1 male child. And so she would not gain the social status equivalent to the maidservants who had each given birth to 2 male children. So God immediately heard her, meaning Leah, her prayer, and changed the fetus within her belly to a girl. As it says, and after she gave birth to a daughter and called her Dinah. This can also be derived from the fact that the feminine form of and after is not written, but the masculine form of and after. So again, you have to look at the Hebrew to take a look at how it's invoweled to see what that is talking about. It is saying that and after it was conceived masculine, but then she bore a female child. So this is a rabbinic text that says that tefillah can have theurgic power to change the sex of a fetus. This time, however, it is not Rachel's prayer reaching into the womb of her sister. It is Leah's prayer having God reach into her own womb to change the sex of her fetus.
Yeah, but I gotta tell you, as I hear the story, and I never heard this that you just discussed, it seems to me that Rachel uses prayer in a vile way at that moment, and Leah uses prayer in an incredibly altruistic way.
So, great point.
To repeat it.
The point is, Rachel seems to pray for her own self-interest. Leah, by contrast, according to these rabbinic texts, is portrayed as being magnanimous. She is concerned about the social status of her sister in their family estate. And she wants her sister to have at least 2 male offspring, to have the same sort of social status as their 2 handmaids. And so she is willing to sacrifice her fetus, not being male, so that her sister could have the possibility of at least having 2 male offspring. So Leah is being re-characterized as being magnanimous, generous, sensitive, which is in contradistinction to the biblical portrayal of Leah. Remember how is she described in the biblical story? As very much concerned about her reputation. So she is being salvaged, if you will, and reconstituted in the rabbinic worldview, in contradistinction to the biblical portrayal of Leah.
Couldn't it also be interpreted that Leah actually wanted Rachel to have only 1 child, and that God took her saying this to mean that he didn't want her to have that, Leah to have that power over her sister?
Tell me more.
Well, that Leah would have the 7th son, and then Rachel couldn't have 2 sons.
Correct.
But if Leah didn't want her sister to be able to have 2 sons, and that this would be her Leah's 7th son, that God took it as being that Leah is being more altruistic, and so God punishes her, basically punishes her. not to have a female child, but punishes her by changing it so that she won't have a son.
Well, let's see how it plays out, because there's still some more midrashim for us to
Okay.
consider. Yes,
I have a question, going back to your statement on Friday evening about how, actually, I can't remember the exact wording, that you were talking about how there are things put out into the world that you want to make people believe, that they're manipulated into, like, I'm finding it difficult, this story, to say, oh, yes, it was a male, sure, but now it turned into a female. I mean,
so you're questioning, how is it that the rabbis were able to come up with these
yes.
theories?
Stories, yeah.
Right. So,
Theories, yes, yes.
so
Like,
remember, they did not have Netflix. They did not have HBO or Disney. They did not have a whole lot of entertainment. What they did have,
good drugs make
the comment was, for the record, they must have had good drugs, end quote. I will not disagree with that. I can't agree with it either. There's increasing archaeological evidence that there have been hallucinogenics found within ancient Judaic sacrificial sites. And there is increasing scholarship on the role of psychedelics in Jewish rituals. That's a whole other conversation, and I am not a scholar yet of those issues. But here, what we do know is that the rabbis had before them a series of biblical texts that are extraordinarily beautiful, profound, ancient, complicated, and full of gaps and inconsistencies and contradictions. And it was their entertainment, if you will, to play with those gaps, silences, contradictions, etc., and fill in those details. And so that's one of the roles of Midrash, is to attend to those questions. And this is what they're trying to do with Dinah. They notice, well, wait a second. She wasn't conceived according to the biblical text. So what did happen? So now they're filling in that gap with a variety of different theories, and we have yet to see some of the more interesting ones. Right now, what we've seen is the role of prayer to have some sort of theurgic capacity. And it's extraordinarily interesting to me is that my theurgy can theoretically have an influence on something that's going on in somebody else's body. As well as that we've seen this other text that says, my prayer can have theurgic power on my own body. So Rachel's transitive prayer and Leah's reflexive prayer. But let's skip to text 14. Midrash Tanchuma. And God remembered Rachel. That is from the biblical text. Oh, let's read verse 13, text 13 to understand this. This is continuing in Genesis 30. Now God remembered Rachel. God heeded her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son. And so she named him, God has given and has taken away my disgrace. So she named him Joseph, which is to say, and may the Lord add another son for me. So in other words, she has two ways of justifying the name or explaining the name of Joseph. But it's the three verbs. Rachel has three verbs associated with Joseph: conceive, bear, and name. But the Midrash, text 14, that's the one I wanted us to turn to.
But he was busy with, Leah.
He's a busy guy. He's a busy guy. He's a boy toy. There are other boy toys, by the way. Joseph himself is a boy toy in Potiphar's house. That's another text study. Fun. Anyway, this one here, text 14. God remembered Rachel. What does that mean? Now, our masters teach If a man's wife were pregnant, may he pray, quote, may it be your will, God, that my wife give birth to a boy? Can you pray that when your spouse is pregnant? Our masters teach that if the wife is already pregnant and he says, may it be your will that my wife give birth to a boy, behold, that is a prayer in vain. It's a tefillah shav, which is an impermissible prayer. Rav Huna said in the name of Rabbi Yosef, even though we have been taught that if his wife is already pregnant and he says, may it be your will that my wife give birth to a boy, this is a prayer in vain. This, Rav Huna says, is not so. He may pray even up to the moment she sits on the birthing stone for her to give birth to a boy. Why? It is not difficult for God to make females males and males females. And
Very interesting that you could go into homosexuality with that as well.
it does not talk about homosexuality, it just talks about gender assignment.
Right, but when there's confusion with gender, there's often homosexuality. And now it's transgender as well.
Correct. And again, if you take a look at both the biblical texts as well as the rabbinic texts, especially on the characters of Dinah and the characters of Joseph, these are gender bending characters. On homosexual relationships and eroticism, I encourage you to read the Song of Songs. It is basically an extraordinary paean of love between two men, Jonathan and David. Judaism embraces a wide range of sexualities and genders. But again, that's a different conversation than this one. But thank you for raising that. Pardon?
That's next year's.
Right.
Yeah, come back.
So here, this rabbinic text is saying that no, you may not pray to change the sex of a child. That, according to the rabbis generally, at the first part of the Midrash, our masters teach, no, thumbs down, you do not do that. It's a prayer in vain. Now recognize that is the collective, that's the teaching of the collective of rabbis. It's anonymous. The sages generally agree on that principle. Now look at the second opinion. The second opinion is named. It's named in Rav Huna, in the name of Rabbi Yossi. So whenever you have a general position, you now have the disagreement, the minority report, if you will, minority opinion. Rav Huna says, well, actually, you may go ahead and pray while your wife is pregnant. And you can pray for this child to be a particular gender up to the moment that she actually is giving birth. Why? Because we believe that God can change the sex of a fetus at any time. God's that powerful. God's awesome. And so here we now have, according to this minority opinion, that prayer is acceptable until labor. And that means all the way up to the ring of fire, where the head is crowning through the vaginal canal. And so this expands the temporal permission to pray for a specific gender male until the birth stool. So it is now possible not only for a woman to pray about another woman's offspring, it is possible for a woman to pray about her own offspring. It is now possible for a man to pray about the offspring in his socially sanctioned partner. Let's go back to text 12. It's taught in the Babylonian Talmud, if a man's wife is pregnant and he says, may God grant him, may God pray to change this child into a masculine, harezot tefillah shav. This is a vain prayer. That seems to be a principle. Are prayers then, in such circumstances, to no avail? The Gemara asks. Rabbi Joseph cited the following objection, citing this story from Genesis chapter 30. And afterwards she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. What does it mean, afterwards? Rav said, well, after Leah had passed judgment on herself, saying 12 tribes are destined to issue from Jacob, 6 have issued from me and 4 from the handmaidens, making that 10. In other words, she can do math. If this is a male, my sister Rachel will not be equal to one of the handmaidens. Immediately, the child was turned into a girl. And it was, as it says, and she called her name Dinah. So in other words, now they are using this story of Dinah and Rachel, of Dinah, Rachel, and Leah as the proof text to justify the prayer to change the sex of a child. So it's just bringing it full, it's just stitching all of that back together. That prayer by the man to change the sex of the child in his wife is rabbinically intelligible.
You agree, what?
Intelligible. So the rabbis can understand that it is intelligible and permissible for a husband to pray that his wife's fetus is the sex that he wants it to be. And specifically, masculine.
The word afterwards, means after conception, not after birth.
Correct. It's after conception. So this, bringing it into the 21st century, we now have the capacity to do amniocentesis. We can now do a whole variety of genetic testing. And it is now possible for us to change the genes of an unfolding fetus while it is still gestating.
Really? Yeah.
Sure. So it doesn't have to necessarily be in vivo. It can be in vitro. So you can take the gametes, egg over here, sperm over here, put them in a swimming pool, your petri dish, have them swim around, do their magic. Now you've got a fertilized egg. You can now go into that fertilized egg, use CRISPR technology, change some genes around. And we know that a doctor in China did this a couple of years ago, and he created children who were resistant to HIV. Unfortunately, both their parents had HIV, and so he wanted to make sure that these children would not be infected with HIV. So he fixed their genetic code and implanted those gametes back into the mother. She gestated and gave birth to these children. They seem to be doing well. He was arrested. The doctor was arrested for doing that because he was not playing God, but he was playing around with the gametes, the genetic code of entities that could not consent to it, and a variety of other bioethical issues.
And CRISPR technology is more specifically what?
CRISPR technology is it's fancy scissors. It's chemical scissors that are used to go into the genetic code, snip out the code that is undesirable, and it now can insert the desirable code, so that theoretically the outcome is the genetic code that you would like, the whole genetic code that you would like. And it is being used with increasing sophistication to address a variety of different congenital issues, which is one bioethical bucket of worms, but then for therapeutic reasons. But if you permit therapeutic use of CRISPR to fix genetic problems, what is to prevent you from then also permitting using the same technology to say, I want my child to have, red hair. I want my child to be really tall. I want my child to have an IQ of 3,000, whatever it might be. Now you're talking about enhancements. So where is the line between therapy and enhancement? And that is a really hard thing to conceive, pun intended, to conceive of, much less to police. And so CRISPR technology, while extraordinarily powerful and exciting, is also quite dangerous. So let's flesh this out one more layer here. I think we're on to text 15, is that correct?
16.
16 read. We skipped one.
We're on 16. No, you read.
Yeah, we're on.
Yeah, we skipped forward.
We read 15 and we're back.
Yeah, we
to
were on
12.
15.
So we did 12, 13, and 14, but we have not done 15 or 16. So, the text, 15, right? Oh, it's. Oh, you did. Oh, I inserted Targum Unitum. I'm sorry, I was using an old version of this.
We were halfway through text 15.
You're right. So I just skipped the last part of those proof texts. And let's now jump down to text 16. My apologies. Text 16, Babylonian Talmud. We cannot cite a miraculous event in refutation of a Mishnah. Alternatively, I may reply that the incident of Leah occurred within 40 days after conception. According to what has been taught, within the first 3 days, a man should pray that the seed should not putrefy. From the 3rd to the 40th day, he should pray that the child should be made male. From the 40th day to 3 months, he should pray that it should not be a sandal. And from 3 months to 6 months, he should pray that it should not be stillborn. From 6 months to 9 months, he should pray for safe delivery. But does such prayer avail? Has not Rabbi Isaac, the son of Rabbi Ami, said, if the man first emits seed, the child will be a girl. If the woman first emits seed, the child will be a boy? With what case are we dealing with here? If, for the instance, they both emitted seed at the same time. Anybody want to translate that into English?
What's a sandal?
Okay, so questions on facts. What is a sandal? A sandal is a deformed fetus that's been aborted. So I'm sure you have either experienced or heard of these circumstances where a fetus that has congenital problems and will not survive, the body naturally will expel it. Our bodies are brilliant that way. It will naturally expel an offspring that will not have survive outside the womb. And the rabbis studied these dropped fetuses, and they called them sandals. And there are many different formations of them. Some of them look like, how are they described in the rabbinic literature? Some of them look like a fish with a human head. Some of them look like a monkey with a monkey's face, but a human body, a human torso, etc. And they have different sort of mixtures, but they are recognized to be deformations. Other factual questions of this text? Yeah.
Well, the other one, you asked to translate it, it means if the men and women are having sex and she comes first.
Yep.
Is satisfied, then she then they'll have a boy.
Correct.
But if he takes his pleasure first, then they'll have a girl.
Correct. So according to rabbinic notions of how children are conceived,
Right.
And this is not the only text that talks about orgasm in the Jewish textual tradition, nor is it the only one that talks about orgasm in the construction of a human being. But this is a consistent opinion that if, as you said, if the woman orgasms first while they are copulating, then you are guaranteed to have a son. If the man orgasms first, they will have a girl. But what is the instance that we're dealing with here? Here we are dealing with the instance where it was simultaneous orgasm. And that is when the prayer becomes permitted. So if it is the case that a couple has sex and one of them orgasmed before the other, you cannot pray to change that fetus's sex because it's already been predetermined biologically according to the rabbinic's notions of physiology. But if you have orgasm together, then you are permitted to pray in that instance because the sex of the child is still up for grabs. So it could very well be that what happened with Leah and Rachel is that they had sex simultaneously and orgasm simultaneously.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do they actually teach this to people during that time period? I mean, was this like a religious, study or something that?
I
So-
was a student who had been taught that.
Yes, again, as I said, the other night, on tabooing subject matters, that you are permitted to teach Judaic sexual ethics. But it has to be done in a particular kind of classroom setting.
Yeah.
So as to prevent people coming to the wrong conclusions about what are Judaically proper sexual ethics. So yes, this is a legitimate form of study. There are some wonderful resources. One is called the Igeret HaKodesh, which is a medieval, very thin tome, now translated into English, called the Holy Letter, which is basically a Jewish Kama Sutra, which talks about the role of eroticism, of foreplay, of caressing, of treatment, is seducing your partner, the role of visual eroticism, of language eroticism, that you're allowed to seduce your partner with language. So it's a beautiful, beautiful resource. And it was written in the medieval period, which means that they had been teaching it for a long time. And then it was transmitted, and we still have it today. So it's a wonderful resource.
And you still being used even in modern television and the news today.
Yeah. There is one other text, and I don't know why it's not on this resource.
Rabbi,
Yeah,
I got a comment about this.
please.
In my mind, based upon fact, what I think fact, I think if this was totally true, there'd be a heck of a lot more boys. Unless it was taught back then, really, the whole idea of female orgasm, which is still so questionable today, I just believe there'd be a lot more men.
That could very well be. And so why then do you think the rabbis were writing these texts?
I'm confused by it, because I just think to myself, this is still an issue today, and yet this is from a long, long time ago. So I don't really understand. They, maybe from what they were teaching, this could be true. I don't know.
Yes, Lord.
Is it? I find myself always looking at half empty instead of half full. I'm gonna look at half full right now for me, which is that, is this a hidden agenda about trying to make sure relationships are more positive and more giving and more successful? And therefore the male delaying his orgasm would be in the best interest of the female,
Mhm.
which is a relationship you want to prolong. It's a good thing. And also the side Benny to this whole thing is you get more boys, and men like to have boys.
So we should also recognize that the contract between a man and a woman when they are married, the ketubah, it's given over to her, right? It's her contract, and she is in control of it. One of the stipulations that's found in rabbinic literature about what the husband owes the woman, it's not only written on in the ketubah, but is hana'ah, of benefit, pleasure. And it is stipulated many times that he is obliged to sexually please his wife. What does it mean to sexually please her? Well, then they go into granular detail. That's a different class. But there is this Judaic principle that in order to fulfill this sexual pleasure, he must make sure that she is sexually satisfied before he sexually satisfies himself. That is his obligation. So it is definitely female focused within the intimacy of a socially sanctioned relationship.
And I didn't mean to stereotype that men only want boys. Scratch that, because I heard a gasp. But what I'm trying to say is that, from a societal standpoint, to have, make sure you have enough men to defend, enough men to do this, that, and the other thing, absolutely.
Mhm.
It seems like it would be a useful thing to, an added benefit a male might value as they realize they should be satisfied.
Right. Ironically, if you think about it, in order for a population to grow, how many, if you had 100 people and you wanted to double the size of that population, what's the best makeup of that population?
A lot more men than women.
No.
99 women and 1 man.
Yeah.
You could double the population very quickly. So it makes biological sense for there to be more women than men.
Yes.
So in contradistinction to the comment earlier, that perhaps it's that there were too many Jewish women and they wanted to, and there was too much competition amongst the men for those, or too much competition among the women for the too few men. And they wanted to rebalance that. And so they're trying to pray for more men so that there is,
China's finding out the other way around.
Hmm?
China's finding
exactly.
out
So
the one
there are
side.
problems with that. Yes, you had a question.
Well, in terms of the benefit of having more men, China has run into a serious problem. Now they have a serious shortage of women.
Yes. So there are problems when you play around with the procreation of a community. Absolutely. So. Okay. It was this text, and I don't think that I gave it to you, unfortunately, so I'm gonna have to read it aloud. Yes, it is a text that unfortunately you're gonna have to listen to. It's the Maharsha on Tractate Nida 31a. All right. Listen well. There is a problem of thinking that Dinah was male and changed to female. For if this is seen this way, the issue is that she was formed male, which meant that Leah emitted her seed first. And so the fetus was then changed to female on account of the foremother's prayer, whether it was Leah's or Rachel's, either way. But Rabbi Eliezer Mizrahi explained these difficulties this way. He said, I heard it explained that Dinah was changed to a daughter. For behold, the male that was in the belly of Leah was given to the belly of Rachel. And the female that was in the belly of Rachel was given to the belly of Leah. Now this clarifies things. Dinah's form at conception was female. This now proves the poet's words that the divine creative power transferred a fetus from a sister's belly and thereby apparently distorted Dinah into Joseph. There is no difficulty in this, end quote. So let me translate that. Is that according to this theory, Rachel and Leah were both pregnant simultaneously. But who was pregnant with whom? So according to this theory, it is that Dinah was conceived not as a man, not as masculine or male, but as female. But she was conceived in Rachel. Joseph was conceived masculine, male, but conceived in Leah. And here the theory is they were transplanted across wombs, taken out from one sister and put into the other sister.
And deep sleep.
Whatever.
That's very
And-
sophisticated for those years.
Correct. And there's no difficulty in this, quote unquote, right? So what's extraordinary is that we now do have that capacity. We have the capacity to extract a fetus from a womb and gestate it in external wombs. It's called ectogestation sacs. You can look it up online and you will see lambs and baby goats being gestated to full term in these ectogestation sacs. And it's going to be just a matter of time when this will also be available for Homo sapien gestation. So we can now outsource gestation. And if you can outsource gestation, you can insource it too. You can put it back into another female, theoretically. They will perfect that technology at some point. But the ancient text to me, which is so exciting, is that the rabbis were, who knows what they were imbibing, but they were able to imagine these capacities to influence the genetic makeup of a fetus. Where it was conceived is distinct from where it was gestated, and that's distinct again from who gave birth to it. And that is distinct again from the social side of what it means to become a woman, to become a mother. And so it leaves me questioning, Dina, who's your mommy? Because it's really unclear. And ultimately, perhaps it really doesn't matter. Was she raised to be a good person? That's what my daddy Pat wants to ask. But you had another question.
I did. I guess I'm overwhelmed by the rabbis studying all of this in the medieval times. Did they not have anything else to look at besides sexuality?
Well, of course. So again, they did not have Netflix. They did not exhaust the internet. They had these classic rabbinic sources, and so they debated them. They also had contemporary issues that they had to contend with. How do we survive in a Christian context? How do we survive in a Muslim context? How do we survive with these plagues that are ravaging the world, etc.? How do we survive dispersal? So they addressed a whole slew of other issues, but they also attended to these issues of procreation and existential integrity of the Judaic people, the biological people. And so they would have these debates, they would come up with their theories, they would eventually write them down and codify them, and then they would transmit it. And so that's what we get to study, is those ongoing conversations. So again, if you look at the Hebrew words that are associated with Dina, she is described as a Na'ar, Nun Ayin Resh, which is actually a young man. And if you look at the words for Joseph, he is described as a Na'ara, which is a young Jewish woman. And so the rabbis are taking these biblical references and expanding upon them and consolidating them, or reconciling them by providing these theories that might seem fantastical, but in other ways, they're theologically needed in order for us to understand these perhaps gender-bending characters in the biblical corpus.
And it's interesting because the rabbis later on, the biblical text later on talks about what a beautiful man
Correct.
Jesus was, in language that's far more reminiscent that would be used for
Absolutely.
a woman.
Absolutely. Joseph is described in chapter 37 of Genesis. He was 17 years old. He was a youth. According to Bereshit Rabbah, he did things that young women do. He made eyes, he walked with a swagger, and he styled his hair. And Rashi also says that he did things that young women do. He styled his hair, he made eyes so that he would appear beautiful. So according to our classic commentators, they understand that Joseph was quite flamboyant. He was a man of a multicolored coat, right? He really took that very seriously. So it's there in the biblical text, it's there in a rabbinic text. He was perhaps a gender bending individual. How awesome is that?
Yeah.
It's amazing that already embedded in our textual tradition is the diversity of human experience.
And in far-reaching thoughts, it might seem why the rest of his brothers decided over all the jealousy of him and his relationship with their father, that they sold him and he ends up in Egypt. And of course, the Pharaoh and all of them, that would have been a comfortable thing because they paint their faces
Interesting.
and align their eyes. And
Interesting.
the way the Pharaoh dresses is the way a woman puts on makeup today.
That's a wonderful theory. That's fantastic.
Could you just ask if any of the folks who are
Yes.
on Zoom with us still might have any questions?
Anybody on Zoom have a question? A problem, an anxiety, an issue?
Questioning our identities.
I welcome any and all. This is also a good opportunity in the last minutes here to stump the chump. If you have any other sort of questions on Jewish ethics, I'm glad I've been able to clarify all Judaic perspectives on anything morally complicated. If not, it's been a pleasure learning with you, and I look forward to continuing the learning, even if it might be from abroad. So, thank you so much.
Again, our deepest thanks to Rabbi Dr. Crane, who will be heading back to Atlanta this afternoon, to Susan Cosden, our committee who helped plan this wonderful weekend. And we hope we'll be able to continue to learn with and from you in the months and years to come.
Hope so.
Shavua Tov to everyone.
Okay.
Okay. You have a ride? Okay.
I wondered how you got here.
You walked.
Yeah, I did that. I was here on Friday when we were arranging rides. Finding rides. Yeah. Yeah. I had a car. Okay. It was total with me and. Fortunately, I think I'm okay. Yes. Had I go.
Breakdown.
One of the most important ones, I was thinking. On the yeah, with my.
Right.
Absolutely. We had people who didn't ask him. For some reason, I was asked them to rent a car. That was it. We decided that. Not to get it. I debated because it wasn't my fault. The first one, I think was her fault. Yeah, the second one, I mean, the first one wasn't her fault. The second was her fault. But it was because she was driving a. Yeah, no, I think. I was. But make sure when you're just.
Anyway, you,
In the long run, there's one thing in my brain. It's still there. And we know. It's like. Somebody just talking about testing and then finding all the other things that you don't want to know about. Exactly. So, whatever. Yeah. So I'm trying to make do without it. I haven't gotten it.
hey Sandy, how are you? We're gonna close this down now too.
But I just, and I